Hello, listeners. If you've enjoyed these narrations, please click on that like and subscribe button. The lead detective of our department retired, and I was his replacement. Our department served a small town, only a few thousand people, so only I inherited one cold case of a missing woman. Since it was over 20 years old, all the leads had been thoroughly picked over. As I dug into the case, I soon found out that there was a very likely suspect in the case. He was seen giving her a ride the same day she disappeared. Aside from him admitting he gave her a ride, there was no other proof of foul play on his part. Late, he was arrested for killing 2 other women exactly like the missing girl. Over 20 years, he admitted nothing about their cases. Everyone in the town knew it had been him who did something to the missing Mary. 2 days after the lead detective retired, the man died of a heart attack in prison. The entire situation was simply unfair. She was so like his other victims. It wasn't likely he just dropped her off and somewhere unharmed. He also hinted at having more victims buried, but now it was impossible to know. The bastard took it to his grave. I still went over the case, desperately trying to dig up anything I could. I was working long hours and arrived before anyone else, and I was still there when they left and the night crew came in. I had taken a break by the coffee machine to pour my 5th cup of coffee that night when I heard 2 of the janitors talking. I was only half paying attention, not wanting to listen in to their affairs, but something they said made me want to eavesdrop. Rose, the older cleaner, had taken his wife to a man who had known around town to be a psychic. Rumor has it he was able to talk to the dead. Rose's mother-in-law had just passed away. They went to him for some sort of information, and the man ended up digging up the entire Side family no one knew about. His mother-in-law had given up a baby for adoption before his wife was born, and not a soul knew until the psychic started to dig. However, he did not claim to come by the information with the powers people assumed he had. He simply stated he was just really good at digging up dirt on people. He did not want payment and refused to call up the spirit of the deceased mother, claiming any further information would just bring harm to the family. The janitors moved away from me and started to work. For the next few days, the idea rattled inside my head. I hated how the thought rotted away inside my brain. I was trying to justify going to a complete stranger for help on the case. I wanted to show him what was available to the public and keep it unofficial. It was like hiring a private investigator. I hated how many good reasons my mind came up with, even though he was a man claiming to have special powers. Or at least didn't do a good job quelling the rumors, saying he did. Legally, getting his help was a big gray area. I kept telling myself this was a bad idea, but that next Saturday, I found myself getting his name and driving to his place out of town. It was just outside the town surrounded by cornfields. It was the middle of summer, so the corns had just started to grow. His house was an old farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been updated in the last 100 years. I wondered if it had even had indoor plumbing. I walked onto the wooden porch, it creaking the entire time. I knocked on the door a few times. An old beaten-up car was in the driveway, but that didn't mean he was home. The car didn't look like it could even run. "Hello, Mr. Hart?" I called out and knocked again. I thought I heard a faint clunking noise coming from the back. There was a big backyard, so maybe he owned chickens. I could check behind the house, then leave. After all, I didn't actually think he would be of any help to me. I just wanted to get rid of that thought invading my work effort. "Mr. Hart," I called out once again when I was halfway to the back.
"Come around back. I'm too busy to meet you."
A man's voice called out to me. I did as he told me. I was right about the chickens. He must have had 100 of them roaming around. They were impressive looking coops lined up behind the house. Each coop with its own theme. One looked like a dollhouse and another looked like a courthouse. Clearly, someone put some time into building them. A tall man was working away, measuring wood, starting on building another house for his pets. I mean, they had to be his pets. I didn't think someone who put this much time, money, and energy into such complex and impressive structures would kill the chickens he spoiled. They must be for eggs only. The man I was looking for had his back turned to me, hunched over a board of wood he was measuring for a new house. By the look of it, he was trying to make a mini castle. A chicken sat on the table he was working on, overlooking his progress. He straightened up to address me, and I saw just how tall and thin he was. His black hair was long and tied back out of his face. Dirt covered him from his long day of work. His clothing was meant for chores based on the holes and faded coloring of his jeans and button-down shirt. He looked pretty normal until he turned around, and my eyes were met by a pair of red ones.
They're colored contacts.
He explained when he saw my surprised expression.
Can I help you, Mr.?
He was looking me over, trying to figure out if we had ever met before, or if he was expecting me. I wanted to call ahead of time, but found it impossible to find his number. I'm Detective Charles Moore. I was hoping. That was all I could get out, before finding myself with a face full of angry feathers. For some baffling reason, he'd thrown the chicken that he was sitting on the table right into my face. It fluttered and lost feathers trying to get back onto the ground safely. He tried to run from me, only to trip over his own tools, falling flat on his face. On reflex, my body moved. In under 10 seconds, he was handcuffed on the ground. I had no reason to handcuff him, aside from the face full of chicken. If he was running from me, then I wanted to at least know why. Did you seriously toss a chicken at me? I asked as I helped him to sit up.
No comment.
If I uncuff you, are you going to do it again?
No comment.
He said more harshly, sticking his nose up. You should at least apologize for the fucking chicken. He ignored me for a few seconds, then very softly said a small sorry Betty to the poor bird. This was a waste of time. I didn't know why I bothered even coming here. Why did you try to run? Is there something illegal over here? I didn't expect him to answer, but saw the gears turning in his head.
It's a reflex around cops. I ran with a bad crowd, but I'm out of that now. And I'm growing a certain plant. Only one for myself, so you can see why a detective randomly showing up freaked me out.
That was a fair answer. I honestly didn't care about any kinds of illegal growing operation, as bad as that is to admit. I knew of at least 5 people in town that had a big operation going on. This guy would have made it on that list to watch if he had anything like that on his property, and I was currently in the wrong here. I handcuffed him for, in a way, assaulting an officer. I also just arrived onto his land and could be treated as trespassing. I considered freeing him, but the shifty look on his face and chickens within arm reach made me reconsider.
So why did you come over here? You heard rumors I lived up to my last name?
He smiled and I dismissed him. I heard you could talk to the dead. I don't believe in that stuff. You're apparently good at finding things out, though. I was hoping you could look over a few case details and see if anything jumped out at you. He looked offended, even though I was giving him some praise. I really couldn't get a read on this guy.
I don't talk to the dead. I'm a necromancer. It's different. And unless this case is very interesting, and I don't have time for playing gumshoe.
Well, this was a wasted trip. This guy's clearly got issues. Calling himself a necromancer, as in raising skeletons and zombies from the grave. I was more offended by the idea that he had thrown a chicken in my face. "All right, I'll just leave you alone then," I replied very quickly, wanting to get out of there.
You don't believe I'm a necromancer, do you? I can prove it. Just go with me on this. It'll only take a few minutes, and all you need to do is hand me that wooden box.
I looked between him and the small box he was nodding towards. I thought he might be crazy and had some sort of weapon inside. I would check in the box before handing it to him. I didn't want this to be a wasted trip, so I decided to humor him. I took a peek inside to see a dead chicken tucked inside, surrounded by wild flowers. He then stood up and traded the box for my handcuffs. I looked at him confused on how he could get out of them. I still had the key in my pocket. I was certain I closed the cuffs so tight, not even his thin wrist could slip free.
Not my first time being cuffed,
he said with a wink that made me take a step away from him, wanting some distance. I watched him as he placed the box down on the hard-packed dirt. The lid coming off and was put aside. He suddenly looked focused as he drew very impressive, perfect circles around the box in the dirt.
I know you're thinking I'm sorta a crazy, handsome bachelor, so I rarely get to show off my skills. Rats got a hold of this poor girl earlier today. Working with fresh corpse costs less sacrifices to make move. For this, I already have everything I need. A corpse, body of someone who murdered the one I'm raising, and some magic words. Since you're here and watching, you need to say the words as well.
What words? Like Alakazam? I really should have left by now. I was absolutely not going to say that. Although, I was impressed by the show he was making of it. With his fingers, he'd drawn more symbols and strange writing in the dirt. Inside the box under the flowers, he pulled a dead rat to place outside the box. It was all very much looking like a ritual that could raise the dead. He impressed me with his artistic skills enough to stay and see where he was going with this. Within a few short minutes, he drew a complex system of symbols around the wooden box. I would let him say his magic words, then ditch. Arms crossed, I watched him still on the ground in front of the box, speaking in a language I didn't even have the faintest idea of. It sounded a little bit fake, honestly. He wasn't being overly dramatic, as I expected him to be, though. I even humored him enough to say the very embarrassing childish words, although very softly after he glared at me, when I did not repeat them the first time. After it was all said and done, I thought the circle and symbols glowed very faintly. I assumed it was just a trick of light. When nothing happened, I was already ready to leave. I took one step and froze. The chicken in the box twitched. Its body started to spasm for a few seconds before going still. I wondered what kind of trick this was. If he drugged the poor thing to make it appear dead, I might have taken him in for animal cruelty. I watched as it sat up and clumsily fell out into the small coffin. On unsteady feet, the chicken started to take a few steps around, dead eyes seeing nothing. Listen, I don't know what you gave it to make it look this rough, but please, just put that thing out of its misery. Clearly, this whole thing was some sort of scam. Dead things just don't get back up and start walking around. He either drugged it or trained a blind, injured chicken.
BB, the second, please show him the neat trick I taught you.
I felt disgusted just being there. I needed him to listen and know just how much I disliked this chicken torture. Listen, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I tripped on my own feet and fell back into the hard floor. And the chicken in front of me, that looked very much dead, started to turn its head around. Entirely around. I heard a disgusting, cracking noise coming from the thing as its head did a 360 spin and just kept slowly spinning. I knew owls could turn their head like that, but I don't think chickens could. And even if they could, I doubted they could just keep twisting their neck around, again and again. Its neck started to look like a twisted rag, and it still didn't stop. I felt like I was about to be sick at the sight. I looked over at the strange man, expecting some sort of explanation. Instead, he just looked back at me, with an expression on his face like a proud child showing off an art project, expecting a gold star. I just couldn't believe this man brought it back from the dead, even with the proof still spinning right in front of my face. For the next hour, he did everything possible to prove the chicken was real, dead and moving. I finally had to accept what I was seeing. Thousands of questions ran through my head, too many to ask at once. The strange man beat me to asking the first question, though.
What about the case did you come here for?
I wanted you to try and dig up some dirt on a cold missing person case. The man who we think is most likely to have kidnapped Miss Mary died in prison. I explained, sitting in the dirt, completely shocked.
Oh, where is he buried?
I only stayed a few minutes before he asked such an ominous question. We made plans to meet up the next night to go grave digging. I could look up where the suspect had been buried, and he wanted to finish the new chicken coop before we started a new job. While I was driving home, I did think about how insane this whole thing was. I couldn't believe I not only let myself go over to his place, but had been talking into another meeting. Backing out was not an option. I did not want to commit a crime or disrespect the dead. I also didn't want the family of the poor missing girl to not know her fate for much longer either. After all, I was only going to dig up a dead body with a necromancer. What was the worst that could happen? I arrived first at our arranged meeting spot, dressed in a dark clothing and a shovel in my trunk. I felt like an idiot. For the 1000th time, I questioned myself what the hell I had gotten into. As time passed, and no necromancer, I was starting to get annoyed. I almost gave up on the whole thing before I heard a car struggling to get down the road. So the beat-up car of his could actually run. Being a necromancer and all, I guessed he could bring all sorts of things back from the dead. Seeing his iced coffee, I was even more annoyed he didn't value my time in the slightest. Follow behind me in your car if you can even make it. I know where he's buried. It's only an hour drive, I told him. I had gotten out of my car earlier to pace angrily around waiting for him to show up.
Go, right now. We haven't even discussed payment for this job yet,
he said with a loud drink from a straw. Mr. Hot. I was so angry I could kill him.
As much as I love being called Hot, I actually go by Neff.
I really was going to end up killing him if he kept on like this. Neff, then. I know you're offering a service I'm fairly certain no one else can. However, don't you think closure for these families is payment enough?
You can't eat closure. How about something simple? Dinner and a movie? Me and you. Nice steak place and a rom-com after?
I'm married, I lied.
She doesn't need to know.
And I have kids. An even bigger lie.
I love kids.
I could barely stand being there talking with him. Spending a meal together would be impossible. That smug grin of his looking so fake on his face, it was off-putting. I had a feeling he was trying his best to appear aloof and flirty. But for what reason? It was easy to see he didn't really want to go out. He just said it would be annoying. Why make me dislike him this much? If you do this and we can get some leads, I'll go to the movies with you. An action one. And there must be a seat between us.
Buy me a tub of popcorn and you have yourself a date. Let's go, and let's take your car.
I didn't even have a chance to back out or stop him from grabbing a hefty duffel bag from his back seat and then climbing into the passenger seat of my car. He even honked the horn when I didn't follow after him fast enough. I just stared, trying to collect myself so I wouldn't deck him while driving. It was pitch black when we arrived. I had a vague idea of where the grave would be. I couldn't see anything but Neff walking around just fine in the dark. Risking a flashlight would not be a good idea in case any security saw us. I just needed to trust him that he could find the grave in the dark. It took a while before we stopped at a small mark bearing the name of the dead man. I was carrying 2 shovels and held out one to Neff. He didn't take it.
Necromancers never do their own digging.
There was no sense arguing with him. I wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as I could. Wasting time trying to get him to do something he adamantly refused to was not something I came here to do. I soon found out that digging was actually pretty hard work. I took off my coat and rolled up my sleeves, the cool night air chilling my sweat, making me hot and cool at the same time. If someone came across us now, I would not be able to talk myself out of it. I was digging a grave to steal a body. No way to get out around that fact. Neff acted as a lookout. I suspected he mostly sat on the tombstone, munching on some sort of snack he brought along. He didn't offer to share any. I did not let myself think about what I was doing. In my mind, I was just digging. I hadn't accepted the fact that there was going to be a corpse at the end of this task. A refusal to acknowledge that fact kept me going. My arms felt sore, and my hands shook from the effort. The skin on my palms felt raw from the work. Only stopping for a few times, I had dug for hours. Morning may arrive before I finish. Exhausted from the effort, I froze when my shovel hit wood. The realization of what I was doing finally struck in after the hollow noise. I was digging a grave. I was standing above a dead body, about to steal it, because I was convinced Neff could resurrect it. Neff picked that moment to nearly give me a heart attack by jumping into the grave next to me. The grave below us gave a groaning sound, threatening to crack from our combined weight.
You're done. I can lift this out.
Neff was a thin man. Until that moment, I hadn't thought of how we would remove the coffin. I'd assumed he would just do what we needed to, and the zombie he created would crawl out of the grave. Whatever the plan was, I didn't actually know it. I just listened to him. Shortly, I found out why the coffin needed to be removed. The hole was just deep enough for us to be difficult for me to lift myself out. If I couldn't do it, then I had no idea how a zombie could have the strength to crawl out of its own grave. After a few minutes of struggling, Neff gave me a hand by pushing me up out of the grave. Taking a well-deserved break, I sat in the grass waiting to see how Neff would manage getting himself and the coffin out. It turned out to be very easy. Lifting the coffin up and over the top of the grave, he slid it onto the grass as if it weighed nothing. In one swift, graceful movement, he was out and brushing himself off. His arms were much thinner than mine, and he looked like he could barely support himself on his legs, let alone lift anything remotely heavy. How did you just... I asked, a little bit dumbfounded.
You like what you see?
Neff replied, posing, not missing a beat. Then he got serious. At least as serious as I've ever seen him. Opening up his duffel bag, he started to reach around inside, pulling out a strange assortment of items. Risking some light, I turned on the flashlight to see what he was doing. When Neff became focused, he was fast, wasting no movements. It was like he did this routine 100 times before. First, he adjusted the coffin, placing in a spot where he had enough room to work. Using a large bottle with a spout, he poured pure white sand in a circle. From where I was sitting, the circle looked perfect. I wondered how much practice it took to be able to make such a perfect circle every time. Around the circle he made more of those strange writings, but only one line around. I thought raising a human would be more complicated than a chicken. Those symbols you're writing, They look a little bit like those from a cartoon my nephew watches. The main character's missing an arm, I think. I commented, remembering back to a quick glance at the show I've seen.
It's called anime. Shut up.
I stayed silent and watched him work. From his bag, he produced dried flowers, too many to have reasonably fit inside the bag. Ripping the coffin open with one hand, he started to arrange the flowers around the body. I couldn't bring myself to look inside. Digging up a body and looking at it are two totally different things. I expected there to be candles and chanting, maybe some chicken sacrifice. There was none of it, just Neff writing some more strange things on the coffin in chalk. For some reason, he took some dirt from the grave and placed it inside of a jar. I wasn't sure if it was for now or later. Out from inside his bag came the last two items, a bracelet made of what looked like to be threads of silver, and a polished wooden board with a small matching wooden hammer. Facing away from me, he stood straight and began speaking in some ancient language. He spoke for a few sentences, ending the ritual off with knocking 3 times against the wooden board. I sat holding my breath, waiting to see what would happen. No lightning or dramatic flashing. Nothing extraordinary happened, aside from a dead man sitting up in his coffin. The sight nearly made me sick. Turning away, I needed to collect myself. Being a convicted killer, I wondered if anyone paid to have him embalmed, or if he was just tossed in the cheapest coffin and then just put in the cemetery owned by the government. The image of his half-rotted corpse trying to get out of the coffin made me chill to my very core. The wind blew, and the smell in my direction made me retch. I'll admit, I wasn't doing as well as I thought I would be. I just wanted to get some answers and get out of that damned place. While I was averting my eyes, Neff put some car air fresheners on wherever he could hang them on the corpse. The mixture of those two smells made it worse. Can you just ask him about the victim so we can get the hell out of here? I nearly begged, like hunching over almost to get sick.
What? Ask him? Does this thing look like it's able to talk?
I could kill him. The shovel was so close. A few good swings would be all it took. What do you mean he can't talk? What was the point of us doing all of this if he can't talk? I was on the verge of becoming hysterical.
Did you really think that I could bring back the dead to the point where they're talking and looking all shiny and new? Alright, I am that talented, but it takes a great amount of sacrifices you do not want to make. And even if we went down that route to making him able to speak, he literally took his crimes to the grave. I make rotting flesh move, not bringing people back to life. 'Cause I'm so talented, I'm able to cheat death and get bits of information that rightfully should have died with him. Instead of telling me where he buried his victims, I'm connecting directly into his past emotions and memories. I can't point to a map telling you who was buried where, but instead it's like a homing pigeon, you know? Instinctively, I know which direction to go find them.
I collapsed in the grass, dirt and tired, trying to figure out how Neff was getting at. He could still find the victims. Who knows how many there were out there? I'd wished in that moment I asked more questions about how this whole thing worked beforehand, so I could be more prepared for it. I let my eyes drift over to the corpse stumbling around. He was such a bastard in life, harming women and making the family suffer by never revealing their resting place. At least now there was a chance for that. So now what? You just walk around pointing me in the right direction? I asked, sounding tired.
I prefer to drive.
I sat in the grass thinking as I saw that the sky was starting to lighten. We had to grab our zombie and leave soon. I didn't even think about if we still refilled the grave before we should leave. I just wanted to shower and go to bed. You're not making any of this up right. Like, this thing could talk, but you're just making us do this long method so you can hang around longer. Neff let out an offended gasp in my comment.
Never been so insulted in my life. There is no truth in that thought at all. I'm certainly not keeping you around, hoping I have future chances of accidentally touching your butt,
he said with fake offense. I really needed a shower. I stood up, brushing myself off the best I could. A horrible thought came to me. Does this mean we have to take him with us? I asked, looking over at the rancid, smelling, stumbling corpse. Neff smiled and nodded, and I groaned at the fact I'd never get that smell out of my car. It took some frantic planning on my part to get things arranged. After dropping Neff back at his car and watching him drive off with our new zombie, I started on getting some time off work. We had no idea how many undiscovered victims there were out there, or how long it would take us to find them. They could be all local, or even all across the country. I was able to get a week off work, even though I was new lead detective in the department. But even with such an important job title, it wasn't as if I could just get as much time as I wanted. I arranged that I would pick up my Necromancer and the zombie at the same place earlier the next day. It should give me a lot of time to think and get well rested for our strange road trip ahead.